Flicka by Mary O'Hara. Chapter 13. For once you're back to breakfast on time, said Rob, as Ken took his seat at the table. Nell filled Ken's bowl with oatmeal and passed it to him. Ever since she had read in the government bulletins that all prize stock was raised on elaborate formulas of mixed grains, or ground oats, and had noticed that the dogs, when they were hungry, squirmed through the wire fence into the calves' corral and ate the ground oats from the feed boxes, oatmeal had a place on her breakfast table. If you can raise good calves and colts on it, I guess you can raise boys, she reasoned. And McLachlan, with a long line of oat-eating Scottish ancestors behind his brawn and toughness, agreed. With the oatmeal, there was always a big pitcher of yellow Guernsey cream and a bowl of brown sugar. Nell, smiling, pushed them towards Ken, noticing the unusual colour in his face. The boy flashed a glance at his mother. His eyes were dark with excitement. His whole face was lit up, transfigured really, and she felt a slight sense of shock. What had happened? He had been different all week, more sure of himself, more alert and happy. But this? Rob McLachlan was looking at Ken too, not missing a thing. Something had happened that morning on the range. What horse did you ride? He asked. Lady. And where is she now? On her way to the border? Jocularly. I put her in the home pasture. She's out there at the fountain now. Was she hot? No, sir. I cooled her off coming home. There was a little smile of pride on Ken's face. And Nell thought, all the right answers so far. The examination went on. Did you give her a good workout? Yes, sir. Then don't ride her again today. Take Baldy if you want a horse. Yes, sir. Break anything? Lose anything? No, sir. Rob laughed. He leaned over and patted Ken on the head. Good work, young man. Coming along. Ken burst out laughing. He was so excited it was hard to sit still and answer properly. He wasn't going to tell about his colt yet. Not till tomorrow when the week was up. But it was hard to hold it in. Hard not to jump up and run around the kitchen shouting and crowing. Anyway, he could tell about Rocket. I didn't lose anything. I found something, he boasted, shoveling in big spoonfuls of oatmeal. I found Rocket. She's back. Where? Demanded Rob and Nell and Howard all together. With the broodmares. Good, said McLachlan. Let's see. What day would this be after her colt, Nell? If the colt was less than a week old when she lost it, calculated Nell. Yes, and then this past week, yes, somewhere between the 9th and 14th day. That's about it, McLachlan grinned. So the wild woman came back for herself. She came up from the south, and Benham went out to get her. She's bred already. I'll say she is, said McLachlan. Nell went to the stove, lifted the bacon out of the hot fat, and laid it on a platter. Orders, please, she cried. 2 on a raft and wreck 'em, shouted Rob jovially, with his big white-toothed smile. 1 looking at you, shouted Ken hilariously. Howard jumped up. I'll do yours over and easy, mother. No one could do Nell's egg to suit her like Howard. She liked it lightly fried on one side, then lightly on the other, not broken. It had to be flipped. Rob could flip them, but he made a big to-do about it and tossed them high, and many a one landed on the stove or the edge of the skillet. Howard poured a little of the hot bacon grease into a 1-egg skillet and broke an egg in. While it crackled and spat, he salted it carefully, and in a moment loosened the curling brown edges, then with a smooth motion of his wrist, gave the pan a lift and a thrust, and the egg rose a few inches into the air, turned a slow somersault, and slid back into the fat. Carrying the hot plates with holders, Nell distributed the eggs and set the bacon on the table. She was still thinking about Ken and kept looking at him. Every time he caught her eye, he smiled blissfully. He was all excited. There was something he was not telling, something he had seen out on the range that morning. The colt, of course, the colt. Nell, said Rob, are you very busy this morning? Nothing special, no baking or cleaning. Why? How'd you like to break a bronc for me? Nell looked up quickly. One of the four? That little mare, Rumba. Yes, I'd love to. Why doesn't Ross do it? Asked Howard. Ross is too tough. Rob's face looked grim. I'm not going to let him monkey with her. I've stood all I can with the other three. I wouldn't be surprised if Don's knees are damaged. Not permanently, cried Nell. Well, it'll take a long time for the swelling to go down. He threw himself about so, and, all tied up the way Ross had him, he kept falling on his knees. I had to walk away. Couldn't look at it. Don't like to interfere with a man when he's been hired to do a job and is doing it his own way, but I couldn't stick it. The little mare, why, her feet would fit in a teacup, as dainty as a fawn, and her forelegs. He picked up Ken's arm, about as big round as Ken's wrist. She's a very funny, special little mare, said Nell. I remember her last summer when you brought her in to halter break her. She fell in the water trough on her back and wouldn't get up. Ken remembered too, laughing. Yes, she stayed there all afternoon with her feet sticking straight up. Howard persisted. Then why don't you do it, Dad? I'm far too heavy, Howard. I've been on her and taught her a bit, and she's used to the saddle all right, but she needs a lighter rider, and she's afraid of Ross. Even if I didn't let him tie her up, she shakes every time she sees him. Could I ride her? Asked Howard. You're light enough, but it isn't only the actual weight. There's something a bit heavy-handed about you, Howard. I saw you give Calico's head a bad jerk the other day. Howard scowled. He was swinging his head up and down. I hate that. So you punished him? Howard nodded. McLaughlin said quietly, Sometimes one has to punish a horse. Calico's got a bad habit with his head, but you gave him more than he needed. Little Rumba couldn't take anything like that at this stage of her training. It might start her bucking, and I don't want her ever to buck. She needs to be reassured and just held nicely, and sort of coaxed. What about me? Demanded Ken. McLaughlin laughed. Why, you'd go off into a dream and the horse could run away with you and you wouldn't know it until 10 miles later. You'd wake up and wonder where you were. What you've got, Ken, is fine hands, but no control. Rumba needs someone with authority. Your mother's got that, and hands like yours, and she's lighter in the saddle than any of you. Not pounds, but balance. Seat. I want you both in the corral when your mother rides Rumba. You'll learn something. When Nell walked up to the stables, she was dressed in well-cut jodhpurs, made of carefully softened and faded blue jean denim. Suitable clothes for her ranch life had been hard to find. She hated to be untidy, hated to be constrained. Boots and breeches she found too heavy and binding, so she had her white linen jodhpurs from Abercrombie and Fitch, copied by a local tailor in blue jean material. She had half a dozen pairs of these. They were nearly indestructible, light enough to be cool, washed perfectly, and were very becoming to her slender, free-moving body. A darker blue jersey polo shirt with very short sleeves left her brown arms bare. She wore pigskin gloves, a round blue linen hat with a narrow brim to pull down over her eyes and stick on against the Wyoming winds. It was said by the local wits that, in Wyoming, you can tell a stranger from a native, because the stranger, if his hat blows off, will pursue it. And on her feet, under the straps of her trousers, soft tan jodhpur shoes with small chainless spurs set into the leather of the heel. Even so, long before the day was done, she was weary of the denim and leather, and was glad to get back into light cotton dresses. Rumba, saddled and bridled, was waiting, tied to the post. Ross came riding into the corral on gangway and dismounted. "Mornin', missus," he said to Nell, managing to convey both gallantry and deference in his slow, drawling voice, and Nell again thought, with a little glow of pleasure, that Mrs. was a royal title in the West. Ross, by the very tilt of his small body as he faced her, put himself at her service. "How's the pony this morning?" asked McLaughlin. "A bit spooky and a little stiff, but travelling all right." "Mother's going to ride Rumba," said Ken. Ross's eyes moved quickly to Rumba, then to McLaughlin. He busied himself loosening the cinch on gangway and said quietly, "She ain't ready to ride yet. She ain't been sacked out with her feet tied like I done with Gangway and the others." McLaughlan said quietly. Rumba's feet are too small and her legs too delicate to tie up. I wouldn't ride her myself, insisted Ross, less'n I was in a rodeo and paid to. Them hot bloods is worse than broncs if once they get to bucking. I think she'll be all right, said McLaughlan. Mrs. McLaughlan's about the right weight. She's a little timid, but she won't have any trouble. Timid, marvelled Ross. I put my wife on a old plug once that was broke pretty fair, and it got to running a little, and she busted out crying and came back bawling. Did I get it? You don't look old enough to have a wife, Ross, said Nell. I got a wife and 2 kids about half as big as Howard and Ken, said Ross, grinning. I'm 25. My brother's 26. Ross rolled himself a cigarette and sat down against the corral fence. Howard and Ken climbed up and sat on the top railing. Nell walked over to Rumba, and Rob stood beside Ross talking to him and pretending not to watch. Rumba became taut, her ears forward, looking at Nell, her head up as if she was on the point of rearing, and her hind legs crouching. Nell held out her hand and talked to her reassuringly, but when the hand touched her head, Rumba jerked up. Nell kept stroking her and talking to her until at last the mare was quiet and her trembling and crouching stopped. Nell turned her back to her, leaning against the post, and stood there talking to Rob and Ross, to give the mare a chance to get used to her body and her voice. Under the eye of a human being, an unbroken horse is in terror. Is your brother a bronc buster too, Ross? No, ma'am. He ain't got the heart. You just got to have the heart for it. Do you do a lot of it, Ross? Sure do, ma'am, all summer long, all over the country, wherever there's a show. One summer I made $1,000. As soon as one rodeo's over, I'm itching to get to the next. Everyone says I'll get killed, but hell, what's the difference? Better than work at that. Rumba, feeling more free now because no eye was upon her, reached out her nose, and Nell felt the soft muzzle against her back between the shoulders. She paid no attention, but Rumba, as if alarmed by the smell of her, jumped back. Ross was talking about the Rodeo Riders Union, called Cowboys Turtle Association, to which he belonged. At a Texas rodeo, they struck for a share of the gate receipts in addition to the prize money. This held up the show for a couple of hours, but they won out. Rumba tried again. This time she was bolder and took a long breath, drawing in the very essence of the human being who, she knew in advance, was going to mount her. Nell knew that if a horse hates the smell of a person, it is hardly possible to make friends. On the other hand, if he likes it, friendship is only a matter of time and patience. Obviously, Nell passed the test, for Rumba rested then, with her nose touching Nell's arm, her eyes and ears directed to the men who were talking, indulging her natural curiosity. Rob did not want the little mare to feel she was the centre of attention. He said horses were like people. No one liked to feel all eyes upon them except show-offs, like Gangway, who were always expected to be watched. Don't you ever get hurt, bronco bustin'? Asked Howard, his feet dangling over Ross's head from where he sat on the fence rail above him. I'll say, was the laconic answer. Last summer, I hurt myself in every show I was in. Break anything? Ribs, collarbone, back, hurt, knee wrenched. Spent most of my time in hospital. When I went in for the 3rd trip last summer, I was broke. They weren't going to let me out till I paid my bill. I says, you might as well let me out, for I ain't got no way to make money laying here in hospital. I got it riding before I can pay you off. Well, they wouldn't, and they was arguing with me, and I says, you call up the rodeo committee here and tell them about me not being able to pay my bill. Well, I guess they did, for they let me out, and I never heard nothing more about the bill, neither. Nell turned around to Rumba and saw that the mare had accepted her. She no longer shivered, but kept her eyes on Nell without fear. Nell gathered up the reins, still stroking her and talking to her. She went to the side, put both arms on top of the saddle, and leaned there, now and then lifting her knee up under the mare's belly, as if she was going to mount. Rumba showed no alarm. Her head was turned a little, one eye back watching Nell. Now Rob joined her and held Rumba's head. Nell put her foot in the stirrup, mounted very slowly, swung her leg over the haunch, got her seat, and Rob untied the halter rope from the post and adjusted the stirrups. A little pressure of the legs, a little urging with voice and hands, and Romba started off slowly. Nell was careful to hold the reins fairly short, so that, in case the mare took a sudden notion to buck, she could not get her head down. They made the round of the corral several times, then Rob opened the gate. He and Ross mounted Don and Gangway, and all three rode down to the practice field for a morning's work. That's the end of chapter 13. Good night, sleep tight.